who should pledge allegiance to the King of Canada. Traditionally, all Canadian elected officials have to in order to be sworn in. But in 2022, the Quebec government passed Bill 4, which abolished the mandatory oath for members of the province's National Assembly. Lawrence David is a constitutional litigator, professor of law at the University of Ottawa, and founder of the Public Interest Litigation Institute. Late last week, he submitted a lawsuit against Bill 4, arguing it's unconstitutional. And he joins us now on the line for more. Good morning, Lawrence.
Good morning, Giacomo, and thank you for having me on.
Quebec passed this bill back in 2022. Why are you pushing back against it now?
Very simple. On October 5th, 2026, Quebec will be holding its first ever provincial general election since the adoption of Bill 4 that abolished the oath of allegiance. As a result, this is the first election after which politicians will be maybe entering the National Assembly without having actually taken the oath of allegiance. And we submit that this risks depriving of legal validity the votes and laws that will be adopted by the National Assembly.
So you're coming at this more from the procedure, the proper process needs to be in place, rather than defending the monarchy.
That's exactly it. So this court challenge is not about monarchy versus republicanism. It's very simple. If Quebec or any other legislature wants to abolish the oath of allegiance for legislators, very simple. Please follow the rules for amending the Constitution that are in Part 5 of the Constitution Act 1982.
So what would that require? They passed it at their legislature, but that wouldn't, and it was unanimous, but that's not enough?
Precisely, because the Constitution has several formulas for amending the Constitution. Provinces and Parliament have a power of unilateral constitutional amendment. However, when it comes to amendments that impact the office of the King or of the Lieutenant Governor, those are expressly listed under the unanimous formula that require the unanimous consent of Parliament and the 10 legislatures in Canada.
So in this case, it would be the House of Commons and the Senate would have to agree to this?
The House of Commons, the Senate, and the 10 provincial legislatures. That is because the oath of allegiance is in the Constitution Act 1867 as a requirement for every single legislator in Canada before they can take their seat. And that reflects the centrality of the crown, the king being the King of Canada and the head of state. So I don't think it's too much to ask, per se, for legislators to pledge an oath of allegiance to the head of state. And I should also emphasize that this oath of allegiance is not an oath to Charles III in his person. It's rather an oath to the monarchy as the institutional personification of the Canadian state, its institutions of democracy, the values and principles that underlie it.
And just clear up one point you made there. So the Quebec legislature, okay, check. You need Canadian Parliament, but it includes House of Commons and the Senate. You also need the other provinces as well, even if it's only going to affect Quebec?
Yes, because the Constitution Act 1982 says that any amendment to the Constitution that impacts the office of the King or the office of the Lieutenant Governor is subject to the unanimous consent formula of the Constitution. Because you can imagine that, let's say we allowed every legislature in Canada to unilaterally abolish the oath of allegiance, we would basically be having legislators that have not taken allegiance to the head of state. And this would be a backdoor way of essentially undermining the monarchy, which, whatever our opinion is on the monarchy, the king is the head of state. So it can't, that's precisely why the founders of the Constitution Act 1982 required unanimous consent.
So part of your challenge, is it safe to say, Lawrence, is about avoiding a precedent here about how the Constitution can be changed without what your argument is following the proper procedure?
Precisely. I mean, if Parliament would have sought to abolish the oath of allegiance unilaterally, I would have mounted the same legal challenge. So this is not a Quebec-only thing, not a Quebec-bashing issue. Indeed, it's about avoiding setting a bad precedent where provinces and Parliament can simply make unilateral constitutional amendments that exceed their actual powers under the Constitution.
So you've submitted the lawsuit. What happens now?
Well, now we'll be waiting for the scheduling of the hearing. And one thing I should note as well is that The government of Canada has not taken a position previously as to the constitutionality of Quebec's move, while this legal procedure that we filed in court names the Attorney General of Canada as one of the interested parties, such that Canada will have to make formal submissions and make its position known.
There's another aspect to this that maybe you can shed light on. If did all members of the MNA, the National Assembly, yes, the MNA in Quebec, take an oath eventually? There were some who said they refused to do it. Did they all take it eventually?
The answer is no. So following the fall election of 2022, most of the members of the National Assembly took the oath, except for the Parti Québécois that had 3 members. They refused. So they struck a deal with the government of Quebec, who then tabled Bill 4 in the legislature to enable the 3 members of the Parti Québécois to sit in the National Assembly without taking the oath of allegiance. And that is a recognition that they had to pass a law because they knew that the oath of allegiance is in fact required. But what we're saying is it was not sufficient for them to act unilaterally. They need, as we said, the consent of Parliament and the 10 provincial legislatures.
But what about the fact that it has to be unanimous? They're going back to that, unanimous in their legislature, but if those members voted on it, but they hadn't taken the allegiance, it sounds like a vicious circle.
Oh, well, here's the thing. The members who did vote for that bill had all taken the oath of allegiance. So that bill was, in fact, properly passed.
I see. Well, lots to untangle there, and I appreciate you explaining this to us, Lawrence. And, of course, we'll be following it as it proceeds forward through the courts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giacomo. Have yourself a great day.
You as well. Lawrence David is a constitutional litigator and professor at the University of Ottawa. He recently submitted a lawsuit against Quebec's Bill 4 for the province to reinstate the mandatory Pledge of Allegiance to the King in the National Assembly. Going to the